how fantastic is this to have so many of you together, reunited on the same stage. Thank you so much for being with us today. And firstly, many congratulations on a fantastic achievement. I think I speak for all of the audience when I say we're absolutely gripped by it again. It's very much of its time, but at the same time, it also feels tremendously modern. So I wanted to begin by asking you all, actually, what your impressions are about seeing it again now, today. So, Howard, maybe if you want to kick us off.
Well, I can barely speak, sorry. I think my main impression is the amazing collaboration that Rock Follies generated. I mean, the scripts were a starting point, our songs were the next level. But it's hard to imagine, if you weren't there, the fact that everybody was on the same page. That's not to say there wasn't tension, there wasn't hard work, there was quite a lot of vomiting. Both at Thames and in the quiet of my home. But we start with Andrew Brown, who was one of the most creative and ebullient producers, Verity Lambert, who took a great risk as the head of drama, because back in those days, we didn't realize that it was kind of breaking all sorts of barriers, because this was what life was like. You know, I didn't intend to break any barriers. This was just it. The design, I mean, going right from the credits into the incredible sets. I mean, every time I see Idol's nightclub, which is based on a Astaire Rogers film, Swing Time. Thank you. Another gay man in the audience. And of course, the casting, which is across the board, from Chaz Speed to the amazing Bull. And of course, Emmeline Price, who I forgot is rather extraordinary altogether. And at the heart of it, Rula, Julie, Charlotte, and no writer could have ever asked for more in the collaboration. And I think that's what got me watching it, really. Obviously, I'm pleased that it seems resonant, but I just kept thinking of the excitement there was, because I guess people were working on something that wasn't happening elsewhere.
Mm. Ladies, how about you? What strikes you the most about seeing it today?
It's made me very emotional. Looking back on those times, which were quite the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me in my career, for definite. The joy of wonderful scripts, amazing dancing routines, and recording albums and fantasy sequences. It was just 2 years of immersion like you wouldn't believe, and there's never been anything else like it. And I'm immensely grateful to Andrew, to Verity, to Howard. And it just...
Andy, his name. He wrote the music.
I know, really.
Have you not met before?
And, to be with Julie and Charlotte and to be given this opportunity was just something extraordinary. And I just think it holds up so well. And it's difficult to praise it when one's in it, but
I second all of that stuff, but I think it's the relevance of today. It's still absolutely relevant. We're all still having these battles, whatever our sexuality, our gender, our politics, our whatever, these battles are still going on. And I just thought, Howard something you said earlier about an outsider, it took an outsider to look at Britain at that time and really see what was going on. And I think the writing is utterly brilliant. I think the music's fantastic, and I think it stands up incredibly well. I have to say, I'm incredibly surprised about how well it stands up. It's 1975, but it caught that era, and its relevance is what struck me.
That wonderful final speech in the episode that we just saw of James talking about betrayal across the board, and the photographs of all the people who we come into contact with and who sell us up shit creek was so true.
It should be said in terms of the rock stuff. This was before punk, and rock was in this limbo, aside from a few groups like Roxy and David Bowie, but the ideals that my generation had, and rock seemed to mean so much back in America as part of the anti-Vietnam movement and the civil rights movement and the gay rights movement and women's rights, seemed to have become bloated, cynical, all about money. And little did we know that coming down the pike was punk, which we had to deal with in the second series. But how was it for you, Andy? Because
Well,
musically...
I had the easiest job of the people on the stage here. I mean, because I had Howard's wonderful lyrics, which I'd previously written without lyrics first, you know, and so the lyrics present part of the rhythm, part of the ideas that come into your head, and I didn't have to dance, I didn't have to act.
But you did have to choose carefully with only one real singer.
Well,
Yes, you didn't have to listen to us.
Not at all. I mean, I think that's one of the great things, is that the actual sound of the Rock Follies music is so much the three voices. I think that, you know, it's a very important thing. And also, can I say thanks to BFI, because the
Yeah.
quality, both
Yes.
the visual and audio quality is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I think we're incredibly grateful. I think we would say, and thank you for coming. I think we'd say we were humbled if that word hadn't been so abused by the least humble people in the world. So I just say we're grateful.
Can I take you right back to the beginning and just ask
Well, I
you...
was born in Brooklyn.
not that far.
Oh, not that far.
I was just wondering about the commissioning process at Thames Television, if you can tell us a little bit about... Because it seems to me that it's a very brave commission for 1976. How did that come about?
Okay, well, I had written a few... I became obsessed with writing for British television. I came here in '68 with my writing partner, and we realized that we were going nowhere writing film scripts that weren't being made. And I was just completely bowled over by drama on British television from '68 to early '70s. And I began to write scripts on speculation, and I was lucky enough to have a wonderful agent, who I still have today, Jenny Casarato. And she kept saying, look, he's rejected it, but it's a wonderful rejection letter. I said, there's nothing wonderful about rejection, sir. But finally, the first script, amazingly, was bought by someone at the BBC. And at the same time, Andrew Brown, who was a New Zealand script editor at Thames Television, was given a few of my scripts by a friend of mine, and he was looking for a new writer, because that was one of the things about television in those days. People like Verity Lambert, Mark Shivers, Andrew were looking for an idiosyncratic writer, not a writer who was going to reproduce what was already on. So Andrew read a script, called Jenny, and said, I want to buy it, and she said, the BBC have just bought it, and he thought I was hot. You know, so one 30-minute film. The timing was right. In the end, to cut a very long story short, the very first play I ever wrote on spec was called Verite, and a spot opened up on Armchair Theatre, and Andrew said, we're going to go with it. Piers Haggard directed it, and it made a splash in the industry. The critics were a bit different. The Daily Express said the author has a psychopathic love of London. Might have been true.
Yeah,
it also produced the best fan letter I've ever had from a guy who said the author of this play should be decapitated and his head displayed on a pike outside of the Tower of London, which I thought was such a welcome from an immigrant from New York. So it went out in October '70. That's how fast things moved in those days. And within a month, I'd been commissioned to write another play, Censored Scenes from King Kong. Andrew decided he would do another half-hour play. The BBC were going to do a half-hour play. And Andrew was moving to Stella Richmond Productions, and he said, we'd like a 6-part drama series. Now, that was the holy grail in those days. They called it the television novel. It wasn't called a miniseries until the Americans started to do it, and they gave it their own name. And for a long time, I had been thinking about how many actors I knew back in New York and back in London who didn't want to be movie stars, they wanted to be rock stars. And in New York in particular, in the '60s, I knew dozens of people, including 3 French models who called themselves Les Trash, which, amazing, Andy Warhol never discovered them. They could have been big. I said to Andrew, I think I'd like to write something. And weirdly, I didn't know how to get there, but I knew the basic line of it because I'd written the outline for a musical about a year before called Stars, which was never done, but it was about a group of actors meeting in Broadway Annie, sound familiar, and the music director trying to create a rock band out of 3 of the actors. And that was the starting point. And I said to Andrew, I know it should be about these women who start with a kind of honest, unpretentious, but sort of gutsy sound, and they will have their image changed. And they're going to wind up, I won't tell you how, but weirdly, when you see the final episode, I knew where it was going. I don't know how it was getting there, but I knew how it was going. And in those days, if a producer was excited, you got at least commission to do the first draft with actual money, as opposed to the endless amount of outlines and synopses, and it's a concept, let's hope it'll become an idea, and maybe you'll get some money down the road. So that's a very short answer, or long answer to a short question.
And 15 million viewers, which, you know, they would kill for now. What are your memories of the impact that it made when it was transmissioned in 1976?
Not being able to go to the supermarket without people grabbing you. It was really, it was really weird.
From one day to the next.
One day to the next, it just
change.
changed, and it was like you couldn't buy your Tampax without somebody looking over your shoulder.
I personally didn't have that experience.
I bet you had others.
And I've got to ask you both again about the amazing routines that we see in the show. Sometimes as many as 3 really complicated, all singing, all dancing, all acting numbers per episode. How did you approach that on such a tight
Well, we did have
television
an
schedule?
amazing choreographer,
Well, he was in it, David Tagore.
David Tagore,
Alan Noguchi.
who was fantastic and terribly patient. I mean, I was certainly not a natural dancer. I don't know whether you think you were. Julie was the only one who had. Sorry, I didn't mean.
David referred to me as a klutz. I mean, it was fine. I was used to it.
Julie was the only one who had a sort of natural rock and roll rhythm, and an experience of, singing proper rock music.
We did it. We didn't do. We had sections where we did the fantasy numbers. At the end of, we did the drama, and then we had how long was it, Howard?
2 weeks.
2 weeks to do all the musical numbers. And we just had to do this dance. I mean, I'm a ghastly dancer. I hate dancing. And that side of it for me was incredibly difficult. That first number, Stairway, would never be allowed to be filmed now.
Health and safety.
Health and safety. That staircase was steep. And the steps were about that high, and we had heels that high.
And we had long frocks.
And I watched it the day. I can see myself going.
No, it was. There were some very scary moments.
Can I ask Andy a question?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
What was the reaction like in your world, in the Roxy world?
Oh, yeah.
Did they think you betrayed everybody?
Well, my colleague Brian Ferry didn't discuss it with me. we were having a little bit of a break then anyway. I think we all at that time were doing projects. We were all making solo albums, and I think people thought that I'd gone off and was doing some other project. I didn't really know what was happening about it, really, until it came out. And then talk about the 15 million viewers. I mean, the exciting thing was, of course, that we all gathered in someone's house to watch it, knowing that as the Thames tune came up, and then it started, that everyone was seeing it at the same time.
Yeah, almost nobody had recorders in those days, just a few geeks.
Yeah.
And so that was a sort of great sense of it, that's when you got the feeling.
Yes. And tell us a bit about the process of actually writing the music, because writing music where you've got lyrics presumably provided by Howard first must be a very different process to working with Roxy music.
I mean, for me, again, it was very exciting, because I would get the script, which it had the lyrics in. I think pretty much the lyrics were always with the script. So I would sort of get in my head where there was going to be a fast song or a slow song or a ballady song. I wrote mostly on a Wurlitzer electric piano, and you couldn't record stuff and play it to people, not very easily. You put it onto a reel-to-reel tape recorder, but you couldn't do the sort of thing you would do now, which would be to knock it out on Logic on your laptop and play it to people. So I actually would turn up and play the tunes and sing them and sort of try and get some sense of it across.
And then we would do bits of harmony
Yeah.
and
The band, of course, were the real band who played the music. They appeared. They were a great support as well. I had a very good musical assistant who did a lot of the technical stuff in terms of just rehearsal.
And I have to say, for me, the one really enjoyable part, because I'm a boring writer who finds writing very hard, Ian McEwan wrote that when he sits in front of his typewriter and he starts to write, it's like breathing in the freshest, beautiful, most spring air. Whereas I was in the bathroom throwing up. But working with Andy, for some reason, the lyrics they just sort of came, and then working with him was a joy right from, imagine a guy is brought in from Roxy music in the rock world, and one of the first things he has to say is Broadway Annie. But you didn't bat an eye. You just
I was sort of had quite a lot of energy in those days. So.
Yeah. And it should. I'm sorry, I'm taking over.
No.
That's what I am. I'm a takeover. I'm a benign control freak, but a control freak. It should be said, you see, we got the go-ahead, the green light, on the basis of the first 2 scripts, and then we were casting. And they had the courage, or maybe the craziness, to say, okay, we're going ahead, and everything was in motion. And I got to episode 3, and I absolutely couldn't crack it. It was terrifying. Andrew Brown was a great producer. I would write 5 pages. He would say, these are marvelous, absolutely marvelous. I said, yeah, but I have 55 more pages to write. I don't know what I'm doing. And frankly, the only thing that saved me was that there were strikes. There were 2 strikes near the beginning and near the end, which enabled me to finish the scripts. I only found out many years later that Andrew went to Verity and said, I just don't think he can do 6 hours. It's too much, and I think we should, get Alan Ayckbourn or somebody to come in, who wasn't available, thank God. So also the songs, we didn't know exactly. We knew there'd be a Rock Follies song, but we had written the first couple of episodes, and The Road was the one I couldn't wait for us to work on, but I didn't know how we got there. So it was a strange process. It was organic and in action, and I was changing my mind about some things as it went along. Stephen Moore, who plays Jack so brilliantly and sadly died a couple of weeks ago, I always remember, because in those days you rehearsed for a couple of weeks like a play, and then you recorded in the studio with 2 or 3 camera video. And the scene where Stephen says, well, my students are like Moby Dick, they like Moby Dick, and he's very scathing about the fact that Anna wants to do this musical. And she said, I want to do it, I want to be happy. And he said, yes, it's your Moby Dick. And he gave such a kind of cut and a bite that I thought, oh, this guy isn't just depressed, he is so angry. So I had 4 more episodes to go where I could use that. And I was watching his deviousness of when he gets the other guys to come down to the mermaid disco, or when they're sitting in the Idols nightclub, and he says, I think the caring thing to do is to let everything go. And he is so manipulative. But that's what an actor brings. Why I love actors.
You've just touched on this, but there are many styles of music in the show, and also very appropriately, as the BFI is in the middle of this huge musicals season, paying its own tribute to the great Hollywood musicals, you also pay tribute to various musicals throughout the series. And I wondered whether that eclecticism that goes from hard rock at one end all the way through to the Andrews Sisters style of music at the other.
Don't you give me something away.
No, yeah, that's true.
You didn't hear that.
Didn't hear that, spoiler. Whether that was part of the initial concept between the two of you, that you wanted it to have that completely eclectic feel.
I'll try to break the habit of a lifetime and not hog this entire discussion. One of the things that Andrew and I talked about, I said, I also know that this is a kind of homage to movie musicals, and particularly to start with 30s musicals, because I knew we were beginning in what felt like a depression. And that was the whole motivation for having a nostalgia musical, was like No, 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 No had been a big success in New York at a time when New York was going through a very tough time. And the particular musicals I thought about were the Gold Diggers films, where you had 3 women trying to make it in a very tough world. So I knew there would be both styles that would suggest old musicals, but also there'd be moments that anyone who loved musicals. So when, Derek is suddenly playing Blueberry Hill around the piano, that's a scene, if you know your movies, you've seen tons of films where suddenly the group gets the sound, or the musician gets the sound. And I think you can find that all the way through.
And Andy, I believe that Thames Television were a little bit slow to wake up to the popularity of the music, and you end up recording an album that goes to #1. So just tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Thames, amazingly, had absolutely could not grasp the idea of releasing a record. They talked about doing a single, maybe, and because I was a musician who made records, I wasn't terribly happy with my management at the time, but they sort of were there, and I said, well, look, I'm doing this television thing, and I think we should release a record. And so they took it, but essentially I just sort of took over, and I said, look, we'll book a studio. And it was quite quick, because musicians knew the songs, the girls knew the songs. So we actually, I think we actually recorded the
5
the
days.
albums
In a week, under a
It was
week.
late at night because it was cheap, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, true.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's true.
and we thought, well, yes, we might as well do this. It was, of course, a big surprise to go straight in at #1, which was fantastic.
Brian Ferry must have been thrilled about that.
Yes, he didn't phone me up immediately.
Did he buy a copy?
He sent someone out to buy one. I happen to know.
And very unusually, for musicals, the usual process for a musical is that you lay down all the tracks in a studio beforehand, and then the actors only have to mime to the pre-recorded tracks when they're doing the visuals. But of course, for Rock Follies, you very much depend on the energy of live performance with a live band as well. So tell us about how you achieved those amazing live harmonies.
It was a mixture. I mean, some of it was recorded. Thames had a sort of modest studio. It was, I think, 6-track, and their engineers did a good professional job. But we were always very, very pushed for time. And I think some of the time we'd pre-recorded some of the
the bits with the sort of more energetic dance routines, we did lip sync to.
But where we could, we did it live, and where we could, the band played live. And there were the other little things like the scene playing guitar and harmonica and the piano in the pub. I mean, those were great to have. And the live rehearsal sounds, which I thought were very, very convincing. I thought that some drummers always make a noise in the background, which I think is
And I'm just wondering, Rula, when you first went into that rehearsal in the very first week of the show, did you know you were in something special, or was it almost a little bit apprehensive that this was something so original and so new?
First of all, there were 5 or 6 auditions before we came in for the first week's rehearsal. Julie was always a constant, but the permutations of the other ladies changed.
Well, tell them how we met, Don.
What?
Rula was in another play of mine at
Yes.
the time.
Amazing.
She was playing, I won't even tell you the part, she was playing Miss Science Fiction Fandom at a science fiction convention. It was a play called Amazing Stories. And she had to greet all the science fiction geeks in this silver lame costume.
In a silver lame leotard, which was so tight that I had to keep pulling it down because it was completely rude. And it was impossible to breathe in. So that's
And
how I
this
first met
vision
her.
in silver lame kept saying, have you heard anything about my audition for Rock Follies? Which was completely surreal.
But the first week, I remember coming in and meeting Andy, who looked like, well, the fantastic rock star that he was, with hair down to here with pink tips or blonde tips, I can't remember. Howard, of course, David Tagore.
I had no tips.
It was at the Serbo-Croatian Centre in Ladbroke Grove.
Yes,
Yeah?
yes, yes.
And Charlie and
home
I
away
knew
from
each other
home.
because we were at drama school together. And I have to say it was very exciting. And I certainly got the feeling that it was going to be something different because of the music and the acting and the fantasy sequences and the dancing. So it was a big challenge from the beginning. But yes, I always knew that it was going to be something special.
Also, I was involved in the auditions, which was a great privilege because, in a way, it was all part of it. But I think we tended to not go for the people who had show voices. I mean, we saw a lot of girls and some very, very good singers, but more in that musical theatre kind of type of voice. And I think we wanted to create something that felt new and organic, and that came from the voices we had. So.
And both your characters go on a tremendous journey throughout Series 1 and then Series 2, of course. But perhaps, Charlotte, your character goes on a huge journey from this sort of out-of-work actress trapped in a domestic situation to being this tremendously independent woman. And I just wonder how much, as an actor, you relished that journey that Howard gave you.
Well, I always felt, yes, I hadn't, in seeing it again, I hadn't realised how long and how arced that journey for her is, and it actually goes on into the next series. And it was. I mean, what happened was what always happens in, I think, series is that Howard started writing for us, and there are things. I mean, my father died the day after I got the job, which was a bit of a downer. But then we got the widowed mother, and everybody kept saying to me how sorry they were that my father had died. I mean, and I hadn't realised that until today, and I thought, God, he put that in there because that was. And then I know who the mother was based on, and it was somebody else's mother who I know or knew, and it became more and more organic in a way as it went on. But for Anna, being from a sort of awful pseudo middle class background that I come from, it rang very, very true, and I found it quite easy, horrifyingly easy to play.
And Rula, Q's journey, I always feel it's terribly sad when she says in that episode, "I should have been born in the 1920s," and it feels like she's a character out of her time. Really, is that what you felt about her?
That's definitely what I felt about her, and that's quite often how I felt about myself, except I would have put myself in the 40s. Well, in fact, I was born in the 40s. What am I talking about?
We were.
But, being a topping girl, being someone out of this era, yes, it rang very true with me. And the fact that she was, always putting on a quirky performance to protect herself.
And one of the interesting things, and this is not to be in any way offensive or anything, but as three women in that situation, three actresses, the whole reflection of being controlled, I don't mean that badly, but controlled and manipulated by men, as those three women are in the series, you felt it was because a lot of the people on the production team were blokes, they were chaps, and that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean,
chemistry.
It was like real life. It felt like, well, I've been in this situation where I'm being manipulated by somebody, and then,
And also three women. Three is a strange number because
there's always one out.
Angles change, so it's always two, not necessarily against one, but those relationships change all the time, and certainly I, and I think you as well, had slight issues about becoming harmony queens, which doesn't really come into fruition until the next series, but I was always in awe of Julie. I mean, a voice like I have never heard before or since, and also a stunning performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another strand when I talked to Andrew about this. I was always, as a gay guy, way back in my university days, I was always kind of puzzled that all my close women friends, who I thought were just fantastic, smart, fierce, almost all of them with blokes I thought were absolutely not worthy of them. It just kept puzzling me. And this is really deep, one of the common factors, and remember this goes back to 59, 60, is most of my close women friends had mothers who had lived through the Depression. The mothers themselves had enormous talent that was thwarted, and they had, because they became mothers or they had to struggle to survive. Instead, in my estimation of their being proud of their daughters, they all seemed to chip away at their daughters. And I felt, and this may be Penguin Freud and very facile, that left these incredible women vulnerable to men who intentionally or not intentionally worked on all their lack of self-confidence, which objectively I didn't understand why they would have that. So I knew that all the relationships would be with kinds of men who would in some way be chipping away, giving Julie The Death of Capitalism to read. I still like the fact she only got as far as it having a bad cold.
One of the many brilliant things about Rock Follies, I think, is the way you set up that tension between, that dissonance between life as it actually is for the women and life as they would and want it to be. And I wondered if that was something that was also at the core of your writing in the series.
That was always there, right from the beginning. I guess it was the tradition of musicals. I knew there were going to be moments when they would either have to escape what was happening or it would show what they were hoping. And so I knew every episode would have at least one of those fantasy numbers. And because we made an early decision that everything would be done in the studio, because early on I just loved video, unlike most other writers, because it seemed to me a synthesis between cinema and theater and was very stylized, and that's what a lot of directors and writers didn't like about it. I loved the fact that it had a kind of heightened reality. And so I knew or hoped that we were going to be able to do rather interesting things in a studio with the fantasy numbers. Something we went on actually in the second series to develop, but there's a lot of it in the first series. Every time I see the road, and when it shifts in the middle to suddenly it's in the colors, back again, or the montage of Rock Follies, which almost nobody was doing that in straight video, because they weren't using single camera, they weren't using editing. You were doing 3 cameras on the day, and you would cut on the day. John Schofield and Brian Farnham were both very interested in breaking that. So I remember Verity early on showing me the edited Rock Follies song, and I was incredibly emotional because I thought it's a strong lyric, it's a very strong piece of music, but what John envisioned as a piece of editing is what makes it so powerful, I think, to see all those men again coming back.
And Sugar Mountain as well, with the end scene where the mountain comes up from the set.
And picking up on those fantasy sequences, it's often said that the success of a musical is down to knowing where to put the song to progress the narrative, and that's something that Rock Follies seems to do effortlessly, and I think it does that through those fantasy sequences, that they're getting into the minds of the women and their fears and their desires. So again, was that something that came out of the sort of rehearsal, or was that baked into the idea from the start?
I think I probably had baked it in subconsciously. What I was interested in watching Lamplight, which is very elliptical in the way it reflects what's happening on the road. And I think it's a beautiful song anyway. But there's not a direct connection between what's been happening in the narrative, but there is an emotional connection. And so sometimes we were doing emotional connection, sometimes it was in situ. That was easy. You would do songs like Good Behavior because that was what the sound we were trying to get. Otherwise, you would get the escape songs, and then Biba Nova, I knew had to happen in that Idols nightclub. So it was baked, but to be absolutely honest, at this distance, I'm just amazed I ever didn't die at the end of writing it.
And you were incredibly ahead of the curve in a lot of the themes that we see there. Obviously, there's the theme of female exploitation and male dominance, but then there's also the scenes in the left-wing commune, there are the interracial relationships, homosexuality, and of course the porno industry scenes. All stuff that was really pushing at the boundaries of television in 1976. Were you deliberately trying to do that, or?
No, absolutely not. This is, you don't set out to say I'm going to be innovative or I'm going to do landmarks. This was life. I mean, this is what I knew. And it was interesting when Rock Follies was shown in New York, and someone said to my 90-year-old grandmother, well, your son is living a very strange life in London. She said, that's what life is like. So there was no sense, there was no self-conscious sense, I don't think, certainly not for me, that one was breaking boundaries. This is just what I saw.
And you said there was a censor
Oh,
on the set.
Oh yes, tell
that right?
us about that. Yeah.
Well, as it turns out, we were very protected by many people, but Jeremy Isaacs is an unsung hero. He was the controller of Thames at the time. He was a bit reluctant to give it the green light, but then got completely behind it. We didn't know for a while that ITV had put a censor. Word must have got around that there was something racy about this. So he was on the set, and he was on the set the day of making the porn movie. When Bull was said to Chair Speed, how many orgasms do you want? And the censor said, oh, that's very offensive. It's a terrible word. I said, really? So what if I change it to, why don't I just grease up my pectorals and poke one the usual? I said, that's fine.
And what about when it went out in America? Didn't it have a few problems with right-wing groups when it was shown in America?
Yeah. First of all, Thames Television in those days, nobody was much of thinking of marketing television programs around the world, but Thames did something very clever. They took over an independent television station in New York, WOR-TV, and they showed a lot of their stuff. Naked Civil Servant particularly went over big, but they showed the first 2 episodes of Rock Follies, and a critic, one of the best television critics, picked up on it. That came to the attention of public broadcasting, and they ran it. They ran it as part of their fundraising season, actually, which is the highest accolade, where they stop every 5 minutes and ask for money. But that's an accolade, apparently, in America, anyway. And it was by PBS standards, you have to understand, not that many people watch PBS, but by their standards, it was a huge success in all the major cities, but not in the red state cities. And we only found out later that the woman that President Nixon had appointed was called Nelsa Gidney, a name I will never forget. And she apparently got incredibly violent letters and phone calls saying, what are you showing on? This is the Culture Channel. This is the channel that shows only BBC costume drama. What are you giving us? There's drugs and there's sex and there's pornography. So when it came to buying the second series, she said, oh no, it's not good enough. And in many ways, the second series, certainly technically, is even more interesting. So it took almost 10 years before PBS showed the second series. And that because they had somebody new running PBS. And that was my first experience, which is what was probably going to happen to America many years later, did I know.
And you've got an incredible sense for British society, the class system, our politics. Do you think it's a positive advantage in some respects to be an outsider looking at us Brits when you're writing?
To be absolutely honest, I don't know the answer to that question. It took me living here with my husband for 2 or 3 years before I felt confident to even try to create a British character, because I was writing films with my writing partner, set mainly in America. I just think after 2 or 3 years, there were things I wanted to get down. I don't know how conscious I was about that. I've never been as conscious of the class system, because I think we have a different but equally virulent class system in America. So I'm not one of those people who say, crikey, this is a class-ridden society. But I suppose being an outsider, yes, it must have had an effect, but you can judge better than I can.
I think you've become so much of a Londoner now that
Absolutely.
you can see it here. Actually, Howard has lived 50 years about 3 streets from where I grew up in Pimlico.
I'm working on your plaque.
And we have to give a shout out to the directors, John Schofield
Absolutely.
and Brian Farnham, and the whole look and feel and style of the series. And that, what we would find now quite surprising decision to shoot on tape in the television studio and have no location filming whatsoever. So can you just tell us a little bit about how that decision was made?
Well, that happened from the very first play that was done, when I didn't really know how television worked. But Verite was given the green light, and as I say, it was the first play I wrote on speculation. It was given the green light, and Piers Haggard was a very sensitive and author-friendly director. But the first time I walked onto the studio floor, I just thought, there's something about this I like. And there was one scene in that first play set in a screening room, and I saw that the screening room was created by just 2 rows of chairs and some light. And in the finished scene, it looked like a screening room, but I knew it had been created out of nothing, and that just fascinated me. And the next thing I wrote was specifically for the studio, was censored scenes from King Kong, which had a budget of £10, literally. So I had to create things out of BBC Studio, and we all had to buy collages to use in color separation for fantasy scenes. Brian Farnham directed that. And Brian Farnham and the designer, Mike Porter, created a brilliantly weird, surreal atmosphere that I, being slightly surreal myself, I responded to immediately. And so when we, 2 years later, talked about Rock Follies, Andrew knew what I was talking about, because I said, look at censored scenes from King Kong. That has a lot of what we're going to try and do. Verity Lambert suggested John Schofield. Now, John came out of Light Entertainment, Stanley Baxter shows, which were actually technically brilliant. And we met him, Andrew and I met him, and we met this guy whose idol was Frank Sinatra, who hated rock music and didn't like young people terribly much, sort of like his daughter. And Andrew and I were numb, and we thought, what is Verity thinking? But she had such incredible radar. And what John brought to it was somebody who was experimenting in a way that almost no drama director was, with videotape. And because we knew we wanted to be in a studio, he was the guy. Not only did he do the Stanley Baxters, but he did the television Anthony and Cleopatra, which was Trevor Nunn's production with Janet Sutzman. And John reconceived it completely, all with curtains and lights. And when I saw that, I thought, no, now I get what Verity is trying to do. And indeed, I'm not sure John got 100% on board with the script, but he certainly brought so many visual techniques. And Brian Farnham, I think even Brian learned something from him.
We've just got a couple of minutes left before I throw it home to the audience, but we should just touch briefly on Rock Follies of '77. And I wanted to ask Rula and Charlotte, it gets very dark. A possible spoiler, I'm afraid, folks, for those of you who haven't seen the second series, but that darkness descending into the breakup of the band, was that, you must have all found that quite difficult to play, I would have thought, having been together as colleagues for so long.
Yes, I mean, it was interesting, the second series, because Sue Jones-Davis came into it. And that was another dynamic within the group.
Plus, we had a female manager, of course.
Yeah.
So, it became much more personal.
But it did get very dark, and I think that the idea that it was heading for the end I personally became very aware of that sort of halfway through. And I didn't know where it was going, but I knew it was we were on the...
Well, we
Is
were
it worth
sort of
talking
being
about
pushed
why-
out.
Why we did a second series?
Absolutely, yes.
What happened, there was no intention originally to do a second series. The ending seemed quite final, but Verity Lambert, again, her radar, before we even went out, said, I want to talk about a second series. So I had to think, Andy and I talked about it, Andrew and I talked about it, and I said, look, if we do a second series, it's got to be, we've got to move somewhere, and the first series is so much about men and women. I know that the second series should be women and women. I know they should have a female manager, and I want to talk more about the dynamics within the group of how women react to each other. Also, technically, I said we can't just reproduce what we've done. We've got to move on, starting with the fact we have about 5 songs per episode. I think altogether in the 2 series, we've written almost 50 songs,
about that.
which is kind of amazing. And then I did know it would eventually end with the group breaking up. Well, we can't help spoiling it now. There's the ballsy female manager, played quite brilliantly by Beth Porter, analyzes the problems with the group and decides she must bring in another singer as strong as Julie. And Q and Anna are kind of reduced practically to being backing singers, and that's where the tension comes. And the issue becomes not anything enormous on the face of it, but it's because Anna realizes at one point she's been dubbed. They finally get to cut a record. There's a song called In My Cans about the terror of recording. And Anna realizes that someone's been brought in just to sing some different notes. So on the face of it, a small thing, but actually an earthquake. And that's the beginning of the end.
What did you feel that your characters had learnt by the end of the whole process? Because there's a sort of, you're left with a sort of feeling that success, even if you achieve it, is somehow a little bit empty. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think for me, the journey that Anna went on, she ends up, what real life is about. What real life is about. She's a university-educated, and she ends up, life kicks you in the face. It doesn't matter how successful or not you are. Life's a bitch. I do think that's something at the end that I felt.
But also betrayal, from the outside influences, from the managers and the different people who briefly take us on or don't take us on, is completely different from the betrayal from within the group. And that was personal.
The betrayal of the
It was
women. I think
painful.
that the women's...
And it's particularly the conflict in Dee, who is like the Joan of Arc rock. And in the second series, winds up betraying. We gave her a song called The Things You Have to Do. But near the end, Dee is trying to get Anna to sort of forgive her. And Anna says, after everything you've done to me, don't ask me to love you. And that's also something that's grown in Anna, I think, to be able to say that. And when I had a great phone call after one of the last episodes of the second series from a wonderful American writer who lived with an eminent woman, British sociologist. And he said she wants to come to the phone, but she's still absolutely sobbing because Q has left the group tonight. And I thought, if I can get an eminent sociology to cry,
You're onto something.
well, life is worth living. Well, 3 is always a classic number, and 3 women rock. So that was a no-brainer. I always knew there'd be 3. Plus, Gold Diggers movies always had these 3 women at the center. But did you draw on other?
No.
I thought I saw little Beverly Sisters in one of those scenes.
Well, I did. I'm watching that. It was the one. It was Bieber Nova. There is a bit of Beverly Sisters in that, but I certainly didn't. I think I did watch a bit when we were doing all the 40s stuff in the second series. I think I did watch the Andrews Sisters.
I'd be interested in Andy though. What did you think about having to write harmonies for 3 women, which you probably had never done
Yeah,
before.
I mean, we used to work it out as we went along, and they're kind of, then some of the harmonies are not that conventional, because I don't know, they just sort of worked maybe a bit less lush than some, so there's quite a lot of fourths
There's
and
an
fifths.
idiosyncratic sound, I think, having heard it all again.
And, you know, I mean, obviously, I had girl groups in my head as well, you know, like more maybe sort of Phil Spector and sort of that sort of period rather than, or Motown. But, you know, it's an interesting way to work, actually.
Well, for me, harmonies is sort of natural because it's very Eastern European. And growing up as a young child, we always had to sing Christmas carols in harmonies until our parents burst into tears, which didn't take long. So harmonies are something that I sort of love doing.
Andy was incredibly patient. You were incredibly patient, Andy.
Yeah.
You were. You needed to be.
Yes.
Oh, terrible.
Bertie's then husband, Colin Buxey, who's a very distinguished director now, but I knew Colin, I can't remember exactly how, I think through some fashion friends, I think.
It would make sense.
Or maybe, and I think that you were sort of thinking about, or you and Andrew and Verity were thinking how to proceed with the music.
Absolutely.
And I was incredibly fortunate that you know, my name cropped up, and they said, well, you know, I guess you said, let's have a try. And but I think when I met you and Andrew, there was a great feeling, I think, that we could work together.
Did you have to audition?
I don't think I did, no.
I mean, I was already a big Roxy fan. I thought Colin was kidding me when he said, you're going to meet Andy Mackay wants to do the music. I thought, does he have a doppelganger, or is that the Andy Mackay? But it was, it sounds, you know, fatuous, but there was a kind of immediate connection, I thought. First of all, he was so soft-spoken for a rock star. And there didn't seem to be any ego. I never did see much of an ego. Have you found one?
Oh. Probably. It's lurking. So.
I used to go out shopping with the costume designer occasionally, you know, looking for the 1920s, 1930s stuff. But apart from that, things would be bought and shown to us, and then dress designs for the fantasy sequences would be shown to us, but we didn't actually...
We used to go out on we went out on sessions, I think, individually, and just bought a whole load of stuff.
And opinions were asked, but I don't remember actually ever saying, oh, this is what I would like to look like.
Oh, no, I did.
Did you?
Yes. Because I thought Anna was a bit naff about something. So some of the things she wears early on are a bit naff, I think. And yeah, she wasn't comfortable in the, you know, in the trendy stuff. You had your own thing because you were that sort of...
Oh, no, all of the 1920s, but you
stuff.
were much more comfortable in the jeans and the leather jacket.
Well, I don't think Anna was. I think she had to get into all that. I think it was, you know, sort of...
It was a bit of a struggle getting the band to wear some of the fancy I have to say. The white satin.
Yeah, the white
satin. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I don't think you couldn't do it not think that. I mean, I was a, you know, hippie and a feminist and all of that, you know, and I'd read the Female Eunuch. It changed my life, like it did for many women. So for me personally, I felt we were making a statement. I don't think personally that you could not say we weren't. Could we?
Well, it's what I said earlier. I wasn't writing it
No.
with. This is the way I saw relationships between men and women. So I didn't think of, gosh, this is the first Thames feminist musical. In fact, Spare Rib, which was a really lively, properly feminist periodical, ran a review saying everything in Rock Follies was invalid because it had been written by a guy. So that was something I took home and thought about very hard. I decided there was nothing I could do about it. The scripts were written and I still was a guy.
But that was one of the great things about it, Howard, was that they were so sympathetic to women. You were so sympathetic to women, and I just think that comes over, and I personally don't think you can look at the programme, put it in its period, and as I say, it's so relevant now. It's still
But
relevant.
for the first half of the first series,
The Me
women...
Too, the Me Too campaign, it's totally relevant today.
But we did spend a lot of time trying to please our blokes in the first half of this series. It changes later.
Well, of course, but that's how we evolved, and we end up. I think at the end it's very sad because. Yeah.
Don't tell them.
Sorry.
I have one final question as well, which I have to ask, which is, if you were writing it again today, what would be the main things that you would want to change, if anything? And secondly, what platform would you want it to be on? Netflix, ITV, or perhaps a Western musical?
My lips are sealed. You asked me that question before. I honestly can't answer it because the idea of writing even a sentence these days is too much. So I don't know. One of the things I said to you beforehand is when it became clear that we were going to places that at that point television drama wasn't going to, just because it was a kind of life that wasn't really being dealt with. Now, there'd be nothing that you couldn't do. And in a funny way, that isn't as interesting, I suppose, to me. So that's a really duff answer to your question, but it's honest. It's boring, but it's honest.
On that note, I would like to thank enormously our panel. It's just been absolutely fantastic to get some amazing insights into the series. Thank you so much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please.
I couldn't end on the taxi driver, could I?
Of course you could. Go on.
Because, you see, I'm a slut. I need to hear people laugh. So pathetic. This is a true story, and I'm allowed to quote it. I was in a taxi. While the series was running, it was probably around after episode 4. That's the important thing. And stuck in traffic, and the taxi driver starts the usual, so what do you do? Yes, I write. What do you write? Would I know it? Rock Follies. He said, oh, I watched that with my mom. I said, do you? He said, yeah, we watched that last episode. And my mother turned to me and said, they can't say wank. They can't say wank. And the driver said, I turned to her and I said, they just fucking did, Mom.
Ladies and gentlemen, Howard Schuman,
Always
Andy Mackay, Rula Lenska, and Charlotte Cornwell.